The title of this conference is Different Minds. There are aspects of mind I'd like to touch on. A story about Temple, which she won't tell you for fear of sounding boastful. Around 1981, when Temple was first building and selling her cattle equipment design, the operating men were angry, not because she was autistic, but because she was a woman. It was before women's lib at this time. Though it was going to cost the meat packing company thousands of dollars, they were working to destroy her work so they could say her design was no good. Temple, you spent weeks living in a crummy little motel cabin, getting up early every morning to stand guard over your equipment. One man helped you. You took turns, and you had to trust him. Now her equipment is a major innovation in the meatpacking industry. That took courage and fortitude, nothing to do with autism and everything to do with character. So now, with pride and deepest love, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you my daughter, Temple Grandin. Okay. Thank you, darling. Kate. We got to get the computer turned back on here. Okay, all right, good. We got that up here. And a lot of things to talk about tonight. And, you know, the thing is, autism diagnosis, can you hear me all right with the lavalier? So just use that. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Autism diagnosis has changed a whole lot over the years. See, back when Mother was dealing with this, you mainly were dealing with kids with severe speech delay. Now the autism diagnosis, especially with the DSM-5 changes, includes going all the way from Silicon Valley, geeks and nerds, socially awkward, no speech delay, to kids that have remained very, very handicapped. The spectrum has been greatly expanded. Also, if you want to see the piece of equipment I designed, you can go to Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin. And one other thing is, I learned a lot in the Wall Street Journal. I learned how big corporations have social squabbles and things like that, sort of like kids in the sandbox behaving badly. That was one of the things I learned from the Wall Street Journal. What I want you to think about today is how different minds may process information differently. I also want to thank Mother for knowing just how much to stretch me. I'm seeing too many kids on the spectrum today not getting overprotected, not getting stretched enough to try new things. They're not learning basic things like shopping, shaking hands, ordering food at McDonald's, just the most basic stuff like that. Mother would have me and my sister and my brother be hosts and hostess when she had a party. We had to greet the guests and shake hands. That's something that every family can do. In fact, my brother now is a senior bank vice president, and that helped him on talking with the big bosses to get a job. Well, I get you thinking about different ways of thinking. Now, the thing is, a little tiny bit of that autism trait gives you Silicon Valley. If we get rid of all that genetics, you better like this laptop really well because you won't be getting another one. It's just that simple. And people with bipolar have more siblings in creative careers. See, personality traits are a continuum. Then you get into, at the other end of the spectrum, you get into huge amounts of handicaps. The traits are linked. You know, there's people with autism have more relatives in technical careers. And I've worked with many of these kind of people. I've worked with a lot of people who work in metal work. When I work in the meat industry, I know a guy who was dyslexic, ADHD, speech impediment, still has a bad speech impediment, saved by high school welding. He's a bit autistic too, and he owns a huge metal fabrication company in the meat industry. I can't go into what he makes. I've got to keep a little bit of confidentiality for our undiagnosed Aspies out there. All right. I will, however, talk about the dead ones. How about little Stevie here, little Stevie Jobs? Yep, weird loner, brought snakes to school and turned them loose, liven up the elementary school. Then when he was in high school, he was bullied and teased. And the only places he was not bullied and teased was a neighborhood computer club. And when I went away to the special school, I was still bullied and teased. I was called tape recorder, workhorse. One thing I was learning at that school was work skills. I cleaned 8 horse stalls every single day. I basically ran the horse barn. I was doing all kinds of carpentry work. And then specialized activities, like horseback riding, electronics, and model rocket club, those were havens away from bullying. We need to get kids into those sort of things. Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, farm programs, MakerBot clubs, robotics, band, music, theater. I read an article about Patrick Stewart, you know, Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek The Next Generation, one of my favorite shows. Well, he was a troubled kid who was in the school play at age 12. You see, the thing is, if you take all of these things out of the schools, like, you know, welding and cooking and art and music, kids aren't going to know what they're going to want to do in the future. You know, go out in the rural areas and they're just sports cuckoo. They'll spend $500,000 on sports stuff and then say, we can't afford band. That's just absolutely ridiculous. Because I have a saying, you got to show kids interesting stuff to get them interested in interesting stuff. Just like Mother was saying, I was exposed to cattle in high school. It's one of the reasons why I got interested in the cattle industry. How about little Albert right here? No language until age 3. And there's a brand new Time magazine article about him, and he threw a lot of temper tantrums too. But what happened to him today? How many drugs would he be put on today? Kind of makes me shudder. And I often hear about little smart 3rd and 4th graders who are really good in math, and they won't let them go ahead and do the harder math. They make them do that baby math until they get so frustrated they just give up. Now, another thing we got to look at in a lot of these learning differences is sensory issues. Loud noise hurt my ears. It was like a dentist drill hitting a nerve. Sometimes those loud noises can be tolerated better if the child initiates the sound. Another one of my things I hated was balloons popping. And what you do is you blow a balloon up just a little bit, then let me pop it. Then we make it bigger, and I blow it up a little bigger. You see that where I control it. Other kids have problems with seeing print jiggle on the page. Sometimes that can be helped with putting the homework on colored paper, or maybe trying colored glasses. Sometimes that's helpful. Now, I just talked to a mom today where her kid was doing just great in school. And then they moved to a new school, and they put the autism class under the gym. So above the autism class, kids screaming and all this stuff like this, balls bouncing on the floor, and the kids just going bonkers. That's not going to work. And you know, people don't get it about the sensory issues. And the thing about the sensory problems is they are so variable. One kid's just really mild. One kid has hearing sensitivity. Another kid has touch sensitivity. You know, and I had the problem with not wanting to be touched. That's actually one of the easier ones to fix. Just remember, firm pressure's calming, tickle touches are alerting. But if there's one place where research needs to be done, it's on sensory issues. And there's a very good research study that just came out by Wu and Leon from the University of California, Irvine. You can go on Google Scholar, use these keywords: autism, environmental enrichment. Okay, I'll give you the keywords again. Autism, environmental enrichment. And this is a program where they worked with sensory stuff, doing a lot of things with different pleasant smells, touching different textures like carpet and velvet and rubber and stuff like that, and always changing these, stimulating more than one sense at a time, like smell and touch, maybe sight and touch, music and touch. The paper's got all the directions, and this was a controlled scientific study. And these treatments done for 30 minutes a day resulted in some real improvements. Nice paper, free download, no paywall. You can access that paper. But you see, this is the problem we've got with this spectrum, especially the way it's diagnosed today. It's so broad. I go out and I think of all the kind of, different kind of people I've worked with in construction. There are a lot of people on the spectrum, a lot of dyslexics. I know a whole workshop full of dyslexic millwrights, and they build really complicated stuff. For some of these kids, not all of them, skilled trades is where they need to go, and there's a ton of jobs. Auto mechanic, diesel mechanic, people to fix the wires when the big hailstorm comes along and breaks all the wires. You're going to need somebody to fix that. And certified welder. The oil industry is screaming right now. $100 an hour jobs. We'll have to relocate though. Okay, you need to look at personality traits like a music mixing board. You can dial the anxiety up or dial it down. Different traits, you can adjust them. From, so-called normal to something that's maybe not so normal. Now, I'm a visual thinker, and this really helped me in my work building and designing things. And I used to think everybody was a visual thinker. Well, I learned that that's not the case. Only some people with autism are visual thinkers. Now, working as many years as I have, designing things, getting things built, I kind of have the mentality of, construction projects. You got to sell the project, you got to design the project, you got to build the project, and then you got to make them work. You've got to get things finished, get things done. And there's one of my drawings. I hope you can see it on these screens. Now, when you're a weird, geeky nerd, how did I sell jobs? I sold jobs by showing off a portfolio of my work. A lot of these kids don't interview well, so you got to show your work off. Your music, your art, writing, computer programs you may have written, and you need to have that stuff on your phone and on your tablet because you never know where you're going to meet somebody that can open the door. We got to start looking for these back doors. And I'm finding today an odd lack of resourcefulness in a lot of people today. And I think it goes back to taking all the hands-on classes out. No cooking, no sewing, no woodworking. You see, the thing is, sometimes your project doesn't work. So then you got to figure out how to make it work. And horrors of horrors, I just talked to a biology teacher. She said, where they took all the chemistry labs out and do it online. You still need to do some real chemistry experiments because they don't always work exactly right. So I'd show my work off. And I used to joke around that I had a big visual thinking circuit in my brain. Turns out that I do. Got a real big visual circuit. And my book, The Autistic Brain, I'm going to be talking about the different kinds of thinking styles. I'm really interested in that. Well, that's a circuit in the brain for speak what you hear. And you can see my little pink shrimp there. I definitely don't learn through my ears. Now, that's a normal circuit for speak what you see. That's a cable bundle that goes from the visual cortex up to the language motor area. That's the normal one. That's mine. I got lots of extra bushes there. Now, at what point do extra branches become abnormal? There's no black and white dividing line. But this may explain why, when you put a key word in, I get all these words, just like Google for pictures. And I used to think everybody thinks like Google for pictures. No, everybody doesn't. It was a shock for me to find out that other people think differently. So if I say, think about a church steeple, how does it come into your mind? I was shocked to find out that most people get this vague, generalized image. I see specific ones. My thinking is all very specific. My concept of what a steeple is made up of specific examples. This is a really important difference in thinking. It's bottom up. Concepts are formed with specific examples. You kind of want to imagine the mind of the kid with autism like a big internet. It's equipped with a good Google. but you got to fill it up with web pages. You got to put information in it. That's one of the things the Wall Street Journal did for me. Getting the Wall Street Journal was really, really good. I still read the Wall Street Journal, and I love that along with Business Week. I think we need to be getting more of those magazines out in the schools so kids can see good career things. Business Week, Wired, Fast Company, a bunch of those different magazines. Okay, now the price I paid for all these bushes, visual thinking, is I had less bandwidth, less fibers for speak what I see. So I had trouble getting language out. I was the kind of kid that just couldn't get the language out. You see, that's one kind of speech problem. And my speech teacher would slow down and enunciate words. She'd say cup, and then she'd say cup. And she'd alternate back and forth between saying it the regular way and saying it really slow so I could hear those hard consonant sounds. And because I do have some auditory processing problems. And I think the children that just talk in vowels, they're not hearing any consonants at all. Another kind of language problem is echolalia. They yak out all these TV commercials, they yak out all these movies, but they don't know what they mean. So the language is coming out just fine, but the meaning circuit's not hooked up. You got to teach those kids flashcards, hundreds of nouns, so they start to name things. They might sing a cereal commercial at breakfast because they're associating that now with food. They've got to learn those words mean something. And just start out with the nouns and the position words, in, on, up, down. But you got to use lots of different examples, like the plane went up in the air, a kite went up in the air, I walked up the stairs, I went up in the attic, I threw a ball up in the air. You've got to use a bunch of different specific examples so they learn that up is a concept that applies to many different things. Now this is a brain scan where the blue part's basically full of water, cerebral spinal fluid, and you can see I've got a big asymmetry on the left parietal area. That pretty well trashed out the algebra department. So I managed to get into college. Actually, I had a failed math GRE. It was totally failed. And so how did I manage to get through college without algebra? This I want to thank the educational fads of the mid-60s. The required class was finite math, probability, matrices, and statistics. And with 10 tons of tutoring, I was able to get a decent grade in that. If it had been algebra, I would have been sunk. I think some of these kids that can't do algebra, let's jump to geometry and trig. But no, we pound away on algebra. Which I think is kind of silly because the Greeks invented geometry before algebra was invented. So why is algebra the prerequisite to geometry? It doesn't make very much sense. Now back in '68, Bill Gates and I had access to the same IBM teletype computer. He learned how to program it, I didn't. I wanted to program it. I had free access, all I wanted. I had all the teaching I wanted. I couldn't do it. So when does innate ability really matter? I think it matters when there's extreme ability or extreme disability. And the plasticity, remember your music mixing board? Sort of imagine some screws here. You can move it around in here, but out on the tails of the distribution. I think I've got extreme ability in visual thinking, but the problem I've got with the math is I can't remember sequence. I can't remember I have no working memory. I can't remember long strings of verbal information. I got to write it down. Now this is one of my most important slides. This is the different kinds of minds. I'm the photorealistic visual thinker, object visualizer. Now you got to remember that somebody like Steve Jobs was an artist. He wasn't a mathematician, he was an artist. And the engineers, the mathematicians, had to make the inside of the phone work. Then you've got the pattern thinker, or spatial visualizer. So in your brain, you got circuits for where is something in space. That's the mathematician. My circuits are what is something. You see, there's where and what circuits. And a lot of these little math geniuses, they're terrible at reading. Then you got the verbal guy that knows everything about his favorite stuff. Let's talk about jobs. Visual thinkers, going to be good at auto mechanics. No, you do not need algebra. You know what they're going to be good at? You know what electrical substations are? Well, when those break, you need 6th grade math. You better know what not to touch, or you're going to be baking either crispy or extra crispy. You don't want to have that happen. It's the visual thinking sort of stuff. And I know people that started out digging ditches that now troubleshoot an entire phone system or an entire electrical grid in their city. Then you got the verbal facts guys. These are the guys that'd be good with numbers, record keeping, these sorts of things. Then you got auditory thinkers. I had a student who was an auditory thinker. And then you can have mixtures of these different kinds of thinking. Now you might think, well, where do I get the evidence for this stuff? You know, we're big on evidence-based today. Well, in the autistic brain, I've got the scientific research that shows that the two types of visualizers, the object photorealistic one like me and the mathematical one, really do exist. There's a really neat study called the PET meta-analysis. It shows that they really are real. Just there's two different ways you can do the math, the verbal way or visual spatial. So you got these little kids that are brilliant in math, and they make them show their work. They don't know how to show their work. They don't think the same way. I'd take some precautions against cheating, and once I did that, then I'd let them do it. I want to give you a glimpse into a mind that's not my mind. This praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No tape, no cutting. And what you see in the background, that's the folding pattern. This is extreme origami. This is definitely not my kind of mind. There are some great little origami stars that some kids gave me, and there's a really cool dragon made out of paper. There's another one of my drawings. I hope it shows up good. I always like to show them off. Here's a beautiful bridge done by Jesse Park. Now the thing is, you got to learn how to do work that other people want. Well, Jesse Park used to do pictures of electric blanket controls. And I don't think most people want electric blanket control pictures. She had to learn how to do pictures of stuff that people want. And when I was young, Mother always encouraged me in art, and I was encouraged to do lots of different things in art, like do a watercolor of a beach. Otherwise, it would have been endless horse heads. And by the time I graduated from college, I had a lot of work experience. This is another big problem I'm seeing. Kids graduating from college and they've never done any work experience. And yes, volunteer work does count. There's a very good project called Project Search, where they take people with autism and for an entire year, they intern at a hospital doing a technical job, like setting up all the surgical instruments for a heart operation. And they get very good at these jobs. They take longer to train, but they can get very good at it. You know, the SAP, which is a big computer company, is hiring, autistic engineers to do computer programming, debugging. Now there's some beautiful art done by a guy with autism. He's showing now at some professional shows. I've known this guy now for about 3 years, and he's been getting out, talking to people, and he's socially so much better now. You gotta get him out. We can't let these kids become recluses in the room. I'm hearing too often, he's 21, I can't get him out of the room. I'm seeing too many smart guys, okay, they age out and they're playing video games on Social Security. Then I go over to the meatpacking plant and I find an old gray-haired hippie that's my age, and he runs the entire maintenance shop, and he's lived through 3 plant owners and managed to keep that job. See, I made a point of going back and forth between the silos. And I've been out to Silicon Valley, I've been to Disney Imagineering, I've been to Pixar, I've been to Microsoft, I've been a whole bunch of different places. And I've talked to human resource people in these places. And they go, oh, we know we have autism spectrum, but we don't talk about it. But they know they have it. All right, now what's this mess? Okay, algebra fanatics, you better look at this picture really carefully, because this is the reason why you need the visual thinkers. People like me who failed the grad record exam in math, totally trashed it. That's the remains of the Fukushima nuclear power plant. A nice big mess you don't want to get near. And when I found out why this burned up, I'm going, how could they make that mistake? And what I found is the engineering mind, mathematical mind, doesn't see that maybe when you live next to the sea, they're putting all your emergency equipment, the generators and the pumps, in a non-waterproof basement. It's a real bad idea. So when the tsunami came in, it flooded all of their emergency equipment and drowned it. Yeah, there's no way. If I'd been drawing the concrete work for that, I would have had shipbuilding companies on the phone, and I would have been getting catalogs for doors that you crank shut like on a submarine. If they had had watertight doors, something that simple, something that I'm totally capable of buying and having them install them, this would not have happened. I can't design a nuclear reactor, but yes, I could have watertight doors put in there and make sure the stuff doesn't get wet. You know, you take someone like Steve Jobs, the artist. He loved calligraphy. He was an artist. Every time you look at your iPhone, remember, or your Galaxy, oh, and Steve wanted to sue the you-know-what out of Galaxy, and an artist made that interface. Engineers had to make it work. This is where you need the different kinds of minds. Well, I thought this was an interesting article in the Chronicle of Higher Education from David Baresh, and he goes, the connection between Steve Jobs and, quote, useless humanity programs such as calligraphy should not be ignored. You know, this is where we need the different kinds of things. You know, I'm seeing a lot of real narrow thinking when it comes to Common Core. Let's look at the end of each grade on what destination the kid has to get to. Let good teachers figure out how to do the journey. That's what we need to be doing. Well, and learning the classics, help teach social skills. This is an article published in Science by Kidd and Castino, 2013. All right, well, maybe we do some Shakespeare for the school play. You know, let's work all of the right things in there. You can do math with cooking. You can, let's get creative here. Now, in my work with animals, I noticed that cattle notice little details that people don't notice. I always get asked, are they scared of getting slaughtered? No, they're more scared of the dark. They're scared of reflections, a coat on a fence, a chain hanging down. And little details we don't notice, they notice. Now the thing is, I want to see if you're a good observer here. Okay, if you're working with some of the individuals that cannot talk, maybe they've got a hidden painful medical problem, and that's why they're throwing a fit. And the school doesn't seem to get it, that if you have basketball and screaming and yelling above the autistic classroom, that's not going to work. I think sometimes it's hard for people to imagine an alternate reality where sensory stuff's painful. All right, let's test your observation. Raise your hand if you saw that that animal was focused on the sunbeam. Okay, we're doing pretty good here. It's one of the things I want to teach the veterinary students too, how to be better observers. See how the horse and the zebra have an ear on each other? The other ear's looking at me, taking the picture. And there's the meat plant. I always ask my students to look at that, and they'll go, yeah, there's a chain hanging down, maybe the tunnel's too dark, but oftentimes they fail to see three people standing right where they shouldn't be standing. Again, sometimes the most obvious is the least obvious. Now, in human beings, language can cover up sensory-based thinking because it's a type of Alzheimer's, whereas the language parts of the brain get wrecked. Visual thinking comes out for a while, like this painting in the journal Neurology, Bruce Miller's article. And when Van Gogh was painting Starry Night, I don't think he realized he was putting mathematics into Starry Night. I thought, oh boy, how trippy when the mathematicians got a hold of that. That's very trippy. My thinking's bottom up. Okay, anyone who's working with kids with autism, super important concept. Most people think top down. Concepts consist of specific examples placed in categories. Everything is learned by specific example. Cannot emphasize that enough. I already talked about the going up the hill, the plane flies up in the air. We already talked about that. My thinking's also associative and not linear. See, verbal thinkers are very linear in their thinking. I'm associative, okay? So, United Airlines terminal in Chicago, I was just there yesterday with Mother, and so I'm thinking about United Airlines Concourse B, and my mind can either go into a glass structure category, because you look at that, it's a glass structure, or my mind can go into an airport category. There are no generalized pictures of something like airport. Okay, glass structure, biosphere in Arizona, the old Crystal Palace at the World's Fair, our greenhouse at Colorado State. All right, now I could get into Colorado State and start seeing our different buildings on campus, our buildings under construction. I hope we're going to be able to move into it really soon because we're staying in temporary trailers that aren't too nice. Or I can go into an airport category. Denver, Dallas, Minneapolis, Atlanta, that was a real joke in the wintertime. Maybe good old LaGuardia. And when I asked the astrophysicist about church steeples, he saw motion of people praying. I go, wow, trippy. Total pattern thinker here. You see, he goes, when I was younger, I thought everybody thought in pictures. I go, how could people make some of these mistakes? I'm now realized that there really are different kinds of thinking. And when you get different labels, you tend to have more uneven skills. Cattle think very specific. Okay, if you train them to the man on the horse, they might be really tame to the man on the horse. But then when they see the man on the ground, they get scared. That's new and novel and scary. You know, and sometimes some autistic kids are the same way. Don't do sudden surprises. Yeah, you need to train the cattle to both the man on the horse and the man on the ground. Well, I find lots of times that people have a hard time categorizing problems. The normal mind overgeneralizes. And I don't care if you're trying to troubleshoot a problem in a factory, troubleshoot a problem with autism. Is it a people problem or an equipment problem? Is it a biology problem or a behavior problem? Okay, biology problem, somebody that has no speech might be, his tummy hurts. Well, then that's a medical problem you need to fix. People tend to overgeneralize, and I don't care if we're troubleshooting animal behavior problems or troubleshooting autism behavior problems. Now, if the child's 3 years old and they ask me what to do, I go, tons of early intervention and also do this new sensory thing. You know, that's easy. But once they get older, these kids are so different. I mean, people say to me, oh, my kid has behavior problems in the classroom. Well, I don't know anything about this kid. I don't know how old he is. I don't even know what's going on. Well, I do a lot of talk to policymakers, and I do a lot of talks at colleges, and I'm finding you've got a lot of people that they don't experience their own policies. You know, maybe some of these administrators need to be experiencing some of their own policies. The programmers call that dog fooding. I'd love to make a show called Undercover Legislator. Yes, and we got a real special Walmart for you to work in. Well, been out to the tech places. This is the Mars rover team. I'm certainly not going to do any rocket science. In fact, the older guy there, he was a theater major originally. You know, and then he got into physics, went from theater to physics. I don't know what would have happened to him if he hadn't had theater. You know, sometimes it's kind of really interesting how people get into different jobs. And the other thing, it's okay to be eccentric. NASA wasn't too happy about the mohawk. Well, I think it's fine to be eccentric, but you can't be a dirty slob. And there's a scene in the movie where my boss slams down the deodorant and says, you stink, use it. That actually happened. Now, I was more interested in looking at things than looking at people. I think a brain can be made more thinking, or a brain can be made more social emotional. You know, what point does this become abnormal? There's, mild versions of it. It's just variation. You gotta stretch these kids just slightly out of their comfort zone. I'm seeing too many of these kids where the parent does all the talking. My science teacher, super critical, got me interested in all kinds of interesting stuff. And we gotta be teaching the work skills. It could be something like setting up chairs on the weekend in a church or synagogue, walking dogs, making PowerPoints for local business people. It can be a volunteer job, working in a farmer's market. Gotta learn these work skills, and I think this needs to start in middle school. Kids are also not, doing group play. I talked to a mom that ran a great big organic farm, and she'd get the normal kids to come out, 10 and 11-year-olds, and these kids didn't know how to do free play. They didn't know what to do in a 20-acre walnut orchard that they could run around in. 2 days of video game withdrawal, and then they learned that free play was fun. One of the worst things the schools have done is taken out the hands-on classes. Absolutely the worst. We need to be putting those things back in. You know, I see a lot of schools, they seem to get plenty of money for sports, but then they take band out. If a kid doesn't ever play an instrument, he's not going to find out whether he likes an instrument. And then there's some kids, and I can really relate to this, were skilled trades. I mean, I've done a lot of skilled trades type of stuff. And it was some of the most funnest stuff I ever did. You know, you just got to figure it out and get that job done. Well, that's me riding horses, building things. Boy, this is the stuff that saved me. I don't know what would have happened to me in elementary school if I hadn't had art and embroidery class. And then I was the second girl in my school to get to take wood shop. I got out of cooking. Okay? And while I was up at the Hampshire School, I did lots of building. I remodeled our ski-tow house, and you see how nice I made it? I didn't decorate it with Star Trek. That's not something that people would have wanted. You got to learn how to do work that other people want. You know, we need to limit the video game playing. Don't ban it. You know what the rule was? Mother's rule was 1 hour of TV a day. Yes, and discipline. Oh, mother and the school were together as a team. This is another big problem area I see. It's the school and the parents not getting on the same page. And that's bad. Temper tantrum at school, I get back home and she'd say, oh, Mrs. Deach called today and no television tonight. And they take it away for just one night. And you never take away something that could turn into a job, like art or band instrument. You never take away those kind of things. It's video games. It's the iPad. It's a phone. That's the kind of stuff you take away for one night. That's the rule. And one mom took the whole infatuation with Minecraft and really did a good thing with it. She connected the online world to the real world. She went to the lumberyard, got a whole bunch of 2x4s cut up into blocks. Then she had all the neighborhood kids sand them and paint them. And now they had Minecraft blocks for the driveway. I thought that was just great. See, I think we need to be connecting the virtual world back to the real world. Well, other great activities are things like 4-H and FFA. I think it's too bad that Illinois cut all the funding for FFA, you know, and hopefully there'll be some donors that can help pay for that. Farm stuff was really helpful for me. My ability in art was always encouraged. You got a kid who's good in math, advance him ahead. If the kid likes airplanes, let's read about aviation. Let's do math with airplanes. You know, broaden that out. These are things that can turn into careers. Great online resources. Most of you know about Khan Academy, Code Academy, free programming classes. Udacity, free programming classes. Then there's another new one called Scratch. Lots of great stuff out there. You got to show kids interesting stuff to get them interested in interesting stuff. That's why I got interested in optical illusion rooms, because I saw it in a science movie. And there's one of my designs in SketchUp. Oh, and you can then print it in 3D printers. Wouldn't that be cool? You know, maybe get middle schoolers fixing old broken lawnmower engines. I got a price of free. Let's get resourceful. Interesting things we can get kids involved in. You see, I didn't realize until recently just how much working in the construction trades affects my thinking. Yeah, you want to get the project done. I'd like the kid to get into a good job, support himself, and get out and get to do some of the fun stuff I got to do, building stuff, yes, and there were people that were bad, but there were also people that were good. There was a great contractor named Jim in Arizona who actually seeked me out. There were some really good people in ranching. There were some bad people, but there were also some really good people. Well, I think I'm going to end on that. And it was just great talking to you tonight. Thank you.